Okay, today we're beginning photosynthesis, and photosynthesis is broken up into two processes. We're going to go over a general review of what photosynthesis is, where it happens, and then what those two stages are, and then we're going to get into that first stage. And this is going to take today and tomorrow. All right. So, photosynthesis. This is a process performed by what we call photoautotrophs, in which light energy is converted to chemical energy. And that chemical energy is in the form of sugar. I want to talk about these photoautotrophs. What the heck those are. What does photo stand for? Light. How about auto? You remember what troph means? You can either say energy or you can say food. So an organism that is a photoautotroph is an organism that typically performs photosynthesis to generate food for itself. And examples of photoautotrophs are plants. This includes trees, grass, bushes, shrubs, weeds, moss, all the complex plant life, algae, and photosynthetic bacteria like cyanobacteria. There are such things as chemoautotrophs, which are on the bottom of the ocean. We talked about those a little bit. When your parents were in high school, they were most likely taught you must have the sun to have life, period. That is not the case anymore, because Bob Ballard found those hydrothermal vents. Now, photosynthetic eukaryotes carry out photosynthesis in what organelle? That's right. Does every eukaryotic organism have a mitochondria? Yes or no? Yes. Does every eukaryotic organism have a chloroplast? No. So which one came first? Yeah, if every eukaryote has a mitochondria, then the mitochondria happened before eukaryotes did. But not every eukaryote has a chloroplast. Fungi don't have a chloroplast. We're animals. We don't have a chloroplast. So chloroplasts are actually in the minority of eukaryotes. They're just in eukaryotic plants, bushes, trees, grass, shrubs, vegetables, fruits. Okay. I will draw a chloroplast now, and we need to understand what parts are which, because it's not only important to know what is happening in the two stages of photosynthesis, but you need to know where they're occurring. So this is a chloroplast. Let's see if you can impress me. By what process is it widely accepted that the chloroplast actually came to be a thing? Endosymbiosis, okay? Its origins are endosymbiosis. This is where a large prokaryotic organism engulfed a smaller prokaryotic organism, just like the mitochondria. But the mitochondria breaks down sugar to make ATP. The chloroplast builds up sugar, which is food. So typically a chloroplast is bigger than a mitochondria, and this is actually, a chloroplast is actually a modern day bacteria. It's called cyanobacteria, or blue-green algae. All right, well, you have the outer membrane. And you have the inner membrane. Sort of a similar setup as the mitochondria. What do you call the space between the inner and the outer membrane? The intermembrane space. Intermembrane space. Okay, so that's easy enough. Inner membrane, outer membrane, the space in between, intermembrane space. We're not messing with any of that. You really don't need to know anything because those three parts really don't have anything to do with what we will be doing, but it's worth mentioning because they are there. Now, inside a chloroplast, you have these disc-like structures, like little frisbees. These are called thylakoids. So one of these structures is called a thylakoid. 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 A stack of thylakoids is called a grana. In this open area, this open void that is inside the chloroplast, it's sort of similar to the cytoplasm, and I got to tell you guys, you need to remember that this is not a cell. This is an organelle. It's just like a mitochondria, a Golgi, a nucleus. It's easy to mistake it as a cell because if you really go with endosymbiosis, it used to be its own cell, but it no longer is. This is an organelle. The open void here is called the stroma. Be careful not to confuse that with the stoma. If you remember from Honors Bio, the stoma are those little openings on the bottom of a leaf where CO2 enters the leaf and oxygen exits the leaf. That is called stoma or stomata. This is called stroma. It's kind of like the cytoplasm of a cell. And then we're going to go really far in. I know it's going to be tough for you guys to do this on your notes, but if you zoom in here, the inside of a thylakoid is called the lumen. And what we are going to focus on today and tomorrow is the thylakoid membrane. And what I will do at the end of class today, I kind of did this with you guys yesterday. I can't zoom in any more than that. That's as far as it goes. We're going to zoom in on that membrane and actually see what's going on in there. That's where part one of photosynthesis happens. So just like the other day, I zoomed in on the inner membrane of the mitochondria and we did the electron transport chain. We're going to do the same thing with this, but all in due time. Okay. So we're still just talking about photosynthesis in general. So let's get the actual equation of photosynthesis written down. What three things do photosynthesizers need? And let's start with the actual gas. What gas do photosynthesizers require? Right? They require CO2. What else do photosynthesizers require? We'll get to light energy, but before that, water. And then you have light. The reason we put light here is because it does not have a molar mass. Light is made of photons, and it doesn't have mass. It's just energy. And you're going to make C6H12O6 and 6 molecules of oxygen. So CO2 is carbon dioxide. H2O is water. C6H12O6 is glucose. Glucose is the intended product. And oxygen is a waste product. Now, plants do have mitochondria. They do go through cell respiration, but a lot of CO2 is just considered waste, and it is released through the stomata and into the atmosphere for us, heterotrophs. Yes, Ryan?
So the O2 is, I've heard the term atmosphere about.
Yeah, that's oxygen that gets released into the atmosphere, and then we take it in from the atmosphere into our bloodstream. And then our blood delivers it to our cells for cell respiration. Okay. Let me check something real quick, guys. Just make sure I'm on the right track here. All right. Okay, so let's go over these stages. Photosynthesis has 2 stages, just 2. You know, cell respiration had 4, 5 if you include fermentation. Here, there's only 2. One is called the light-dependent reactions. Guess what you need? What do you need? You need light. Okay. So the site of the light-dependent reactions is going to be the thylakoid membrane. The inputs is going to be water, H2O, sunlight, your electron carrier NADP+, and ADP, adenosine diphosphate. Those are things that you will need in order for light reactions to occur. Your outputs, you're going to produce molecular oxygen, O2. You're going to produce NADPH, and you're going to produce ATP. Fun fact is the oxygen that we inhale and that we need to live is actually from water. So let me ask you this. How many water molecules does it take to make 1 molecule of oxygen if water has 1 oxygen atom and a molecular oxygen has 2? It takes 2 water molecules to make 1 molecule of oxygen for us to breathe. All the oxygen that we inhale came from water. And plants are able to convert it from water to breathable oxygen. Okay, so the last thing I want to do with the light reactions, just for this moment, is what's the purpose? You know, why does this thing exist? The purpose is to convert solar energy or light energy into cellular energy, which is ATP and NADPH. I always used to tell my students that in part 1 of photosynthesis, you make the energy. Guess what you do in step 2? You use the energy. And part 2 is what we won't get to until Friday, or not Friday, Monday. This is called the Calvin cycle. Don't get that confused with the Krebs cycle. The site of the Calvin cycle is the stroma of the chloroplast. The inputs, NADPH, ATP, and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The outputs, NADP+, ADP, and C6H12O6. That's the That's the gold trophy right there. That's what you're trying to make, glucose. Okay, and to make your lives just a little bit easier for tomorrow and Friday, I want to have you guys focus in on something here. I want you to look at the light reactions, and I want you to check out, you don't need to do anything, just watch. All I want you to do is watch. You have NAD plus and ADP. NAD plus is the electron carrier, just like NAD plus and FAD from cell respiration. And look at what you make. You make NADPH, you make ATP. ATP and NADPH come into the Calvin cycle, and they leave as NAD plus and ADP. So here's I think what I would say is an easy, hopefully easy way to understand this. So when you are going from, this is the thylakoid membrane. That is where the part 1 takes place, light reactions. Here's the stroma, just this open void. That is where part 2 takes place. You do not need to write this, just watch this. When you're going from here to there, am I going from part 1 to 2 or 2 to 1? 1 to 2. I'm taking NADPH and ATP to the Calvin cycle. And when you go back, you take the electrons out of NADPH, you get NADP plus, and then you take ADP, and you send it back to the thylakoid membrane. So this is all being recycled. I told you yesterday that life is all about cycles. There's no part of biology that you really can't boil down to a cycle. NADPH and ATP are going from part 1 to part 2. Part 2 uses that energy, then sends those molecules back to the thylakoid membrane. Why would it do that? Why would you send NADP plus and ADP back into part 1? You use it again. And you just recycle it. That's all you do is recycle it. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. I said the other day, if you drive to school, you don't drive your car back. How are you going to do? How will you get to school the next day? Well, how are you even going to get home? You have to go in a cycle. You come to school, you go home. You come to school, you go home. You come to school, you go home. Well, in this, you go to part 1 to part 2, part 1 part to part 2, part 1 to part 2. Okay, so with that all being said, that's just a quick overview of photosynthesis. Now let's get into the light reactions specifically. All right. Light-dependent reactions. Light-dependent reactions are the energy capture, is the energy capture phase of photosynthesis. In this, you produce, the energy that you produce is ATP and NADPH. You all know what ATP is by now. It is cell energy. NADPH is your new electron carrier. I must warn you that on either the Hillsborough test or the AP biology exam, they try to trick you into thinking that NADH is in photosynthesis. It is not. The electron carrier in photosynthesis is NADPH. So I want you to just try to associate that P with plants or photosynthesis. That's not what the P stands for. It stands for phosphate, but just for your purposes, just pretend it stands for plants or pretend it stands for photosynthesis. I'm telling you, they will try to trick you. NAD plus and FAD belong to cell respiration. NADP plus, which becomes NADPH, belongs to photosynthesis. So let's talk about this electron carrier here, okay? It starts out as NADP plus, and it becomes NADPH through the process of reduction. NADPH has 2 electrons and 1 hydrogen ion. That's the big change. It is carrying electrons, just like NADH and FADH2 did. Now, to show you how it actually gets constructed and reduced, I think reduced is the better word. Let's do what I did with cell respiration. Let's start off with NADP+. If you add 1 hydrogen ion to that, it will be known as NADPH with a positive 2 charge. That's your first reaction. We will call that reaction A. You then add 1 electron to that. Its overall charge will go down by 1. It has been reduced. So this will now be NADPH positive 1. It will then go down, be reduced one more time. You get 1 more electron to reduce it once more, and it is now NADPH. And this is your third reaction. So this is another example of coupled reactions. There's 3 coupled reactions. The reactant or the products of reaction A is a product of reaction B. A product of reaction B is a reactant for reaction C. Here's your first reaction. Here's your second reaction. Here's your third reaction. Okay, so that is your electron carrier. 2 electrons at a time. Next. Energy from sunlight is captured by molecules called pigments. Do you remember what the main pigment within a chloroplast is that absorbs most of the light from the sun? Chlorophyll. Well, there's actually 2 types, or 3 types of pigments. There's 2 you need to know, but I'm going to throw in a third one. Yeah, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and carotenoids. Now, I'm going to come back to these. I'm going to tell you guys what the wavelength, what the wavelength is of light that these absorb. And in order to understand what I mean by what wavelength of light, I kind of need to go over the lesson that you all should have gotten when you were in chemistry about wavelength, frequency, and the electromagnetic spectrum. So let's do that. Light is carried on a photon. A photon has no mass. That's why when we write the equation for cell respiration, you put the sun over the yield zero, because it doesn't have a molar mass. All light is carried on the electromagnetic spectrum. You should have done the electromagnetic spectrum in the first quarter of chemistry, which for some of you was last year, for some of you it was 2 years ago, for some of you, you haven't even taken chem yet. So to get this, and I'm going to draw out the whole spectrum for you, light travels as waves. It looks like this. Or it can look like this. or it can be really strong. And look like that. And I could go all day. Now, there's two main qualities of a wave. You have wavelength, which is the Greek letter lambda, and it is measured in meters, or a derivative of meters, like micrometers, nanometers, millimeters. It's just the distance between two crests of a wave. So if you look here, here's a wavelength right here on this first wave I drew. The distance between two crests is the wavelength. Here's another one. It's the Greek letter lambda. Look, kind of looks like an upside down Y. And then if I zoom in here, here's another. Now I'm going to give these waves some letters, guys, just so we can identify them easily. We got wave A, B, and C. Which wave looks like it has the longest wavelength, A, B, or C? A definitely does. So what this means for wave A, it has the longest wavelength, but that turns out to be the weakest frequency. It is the weakest wave. So when you have a wave that is a combination of long wavelength, that means it has a low frequency. Frequency is how many waves pass a given point per second. It's measured in hertz. If I said, how frequently do you have a snack? Not just in a day. How frequently do you eat during one day? Well, when we talk about frequency with the electromagnetic spectrum, it's how many of these waves, and they're traveling like this. How many waves are passing a point per second? If the wavelength is long, then it's going to be like this. That means the frequency is going to be really low. But if you have a wave like B or even C, it's really fast. So you have a lot of waves passing a point per second. B has a shorter wavelength than A, and C has a shorter wavelength than B. When you have a short wavelength, you have a high frequency. And the combination of long wavelength and low frequency is weak. And the combination of short wavelength and high frequency is strong. So this is a good time to do the electromagnetic spectrum. And we'll go from the weakest form of electromagnetic radiation to the strongest form of electromagnetic radiation. Okay, on the left, we'll have the weakest. This is going to be radio waves. If you get in your car this afternoon and you turn on 93.3 FLZ, that is 93.3 megahertz. And that's FM radio. If you want to go to a frequency weaker than that, you would do AM radio. Stronger than FM is TV. These radio waves are traveling through your body right now. You don't even feel it. They're weak. Our government would not allow radio waves to be blasted through our whole community in our country if they were harmful for us. So you don't have to worry about radio waves. Radio waves are very weak, which means they have a very long wavelength, a very low frequency. A little bit stronger than radio waves are going to be microwaves. A little bit stronger than microwaves is going to be infrared. If you've ever seen movies like Predator, the alien in the movie can actually see the body heat of his victims, the parts that are hot and cold. That's known as infrared. Police officers have infrared cameras on their helicopters. I was watching a video where there were 3 teenagers who stole a car over in St. Pete, and it was the middle of the night, like 1 a.m. And so it's going to be pitch black. but the helicopter's chasing the car down. And what it looks like on the camera is everything looks black, but the car looks white because the car is giving off heat. And anything that gives off heat is going to be clearly visible. So the guy in the helicopter is able to radio down to the cars, make a left, make a right. They went this way, they went that way. Well, eventually the kids ditch the car and they go running into someone's backyard, thinking, okay, it's 1 a.m. They can't find us. It's really dark. We can just hide. We got the guy in the helicopter who can see their heat. And so he'll radio down to police officers. He's in the backyard of the one-story house with a boat. And they caught him. If you remember the Boston bombing a few years ago, they found there was two brothers, an older brother and a younger brother. They killed the older brother. They found the younger brother hanging out in a boat in someone's backyard. You got the helicopter patrolling overhead, and the helicopter sees a heat signature in the boat. And they're like, why would there be a heat signature in a boat in someone's backyard at night? Check out that boat. And that's where he was hiding, and they caught him. Next is a very small sliver, which I'm going to skip for now. We'll get back to it. After that small sliver, you have ultraviolet, or UV. We know that is pretty dangerous when we are out in the sun. That can cause sunburn. It can cause cancer. Next are going to be X-rays. X-rays can be pretty dangerous if you get too much of them over a certain period of time. And then the strongest of all, gamma. This is why Stan Lee chose gamma rays of all forms of radiation to make the Hulk. I mean, no one can survive gamma rays. Well, I want to go back to that little sliver. This is visible light. This is what our pathetic little human eyes can actually see. We do have technology to be able to see all these forms of radiation, all of them. We can see infrared, we can see ultraviolet, we can see X-rays, all of it. But just without any technology, just good old nature and evolution, we can only see visible light. And so I'm going to expand on this box. And this is going to be all the colors of the rainbow. The weakest color is red. A little bit stronger than red, orange. A little bit stronger than orange, yellow. A little bit stronger than yellow, green. A little stronger than green, blue. A little bit stronger than blue, indigo. And a little bit stronger than indigo, violet. If you don't have all these colors, here's what you can write instead. Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Now, we can see those colors, but we cannot see those colors in sunlight because sunlight is all the colors. We call that white light. White is considered to be all the colors. Black is the absence of color. This is why if you wear a black t-shirt out in the sun, it feels like it's getting really hot because which is basic diffusion. Light wants to be where there is no light. And so if you're wearing a black shirt or you have a black car or like you have black leather seats in your car, light wants to be where there is no light. Well, black is the absence of light. So light wants to go to black. White is all the colors. So this is why it's you won't get cooked as much or you won't feel like you're so hot if you're wearing something that's white. This is why the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wear their white jerseys in September and October. You're not going to see them wear red until November, unless it's a night game. If you watched the game last week against Green Bay, the Bucs wore white. If you've watched them when they played the Chargers at home, they wore white. When they played the Carolina Panthers at home, the Bucs wore white. The Dolphins do that too, because in Florida it is so stinking hot. Why wear a color that's going to make your players even hotter? Force the other team to wear their dark colors. Maybe that might be an advantage. And something I noticed is every time the Buccaneers force the Carolina Panthers, whose colors are black and blue, sky blue, whenever the Bucs force them to wear their home colors, the Panthers always wear their really light blue instead of their black, because black is going to attract all that light. There was a game, Bucs versus Eagles, a long time ago. It was so hot, the Bucs wore white. They made the Eagles wear their dark green. The Eagles players were puking by the fourth quarter, like puking all over the field. So if you have an opponent that wears black or dark green or dark blue, make them wear it. So that's why the Bucks don't wear their dark red uniforms until it cools off around here in November. So fun fact. Well, let's get into the actual wavelengths of these colors. Red is the weakest. It has the longest wavelength. Violet is the strongest, has the shortest wavelength. So red has a wavelength of about, what do I got here? The very end is 750 nanometers. Violet is way over here. That's going to be about 380 nanometers. So definitely violet has shorter waves, which means it has a higher frequency and it is stronger. Now, for plants, they absorb some of these colors and they reflect one of these colors. So let's go back up to the chlorophyll. Chlorophyll A absorbs 665 nanometers. That's the wavelength. That's going to be right about here. Red. Chlorophyll B absorbs about, what do I have? 640 nanometers. That's going to be right about here. Orange. Now, not only do they absorb those colors, let me look at my notes here. Chlorophyll A also absorbs about 400. That's going to be indigo. And chlorophyll B absorbs about 450. That's going to be blue. So, guys, basically, chlorophyll A and B absorb everything but green. They absorb red, they absorb orange, they absorb blue, indigo, and violet. The colors that chlorophyll does not absorb is a little bit of yellow, but mostly green. This is why plants appear green to us, because what is the opposite of absorption? Reflection. It might not seem like it, but the color green on trees and grass and plants and bushes is reflected back at you. Chlorophyll does not absorb green, it reflects green, and that's why it appears green to us. But I'm going to tell you something that's not going to be on a test, it's not going to be on an assessment. I think it's just a really fun fact to know, especially this time of year. So you don't need to write this down. Give your writer's hand a little break. I have this third pigment up here called carotenoids. Carotenoids absorbs between 380 and 500. If you want to know what colors those are, that's going to be green, blue, indigo, and violet. Here's why I think this is pretty cool. Here's something that you may have never known before. Not everything you have to learn in this class is going to be on the test. So has anyone ever gone up north and actually seen the leaves change color? It's a pretty cool sight. I've never seen it, but I've seen photos. And when I watch the nightly local news, a lot of the meteorologists show a satellite image of Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Canada, and it's orange and yellow. It's awesome. You can see it from space. So at this time of year, or during the summertime, trees are green. The reason that they're green is because there is plenty of liquid H2O. And there's plenty of sunlight. But as we get into autumn and then into winter, there's not going to be liquid H2O. Water's going to be frozen as snow or ice. And if you've ever been up north during the summertime or the winter time, there's not a whole lot of sunlight. I was up in Minnesota for like a week a few years ago, and I'm a Florida guy. I'm a Florida man. I was born and raised here. I went up to Minnesota for a week. I saw the sun for like a grand total of 30 minutes, and I felt weird. It's called seasonal affective disorder, SAD. And you feel like you're off. My dad grew up in that part of the country, and he would tell me, he would go to work, it would be dark. he would leave work, it would be dark. And he felt depressed. And it happens to a lot of us when you're used to sunlight, especially us Floridians. It's seasonal affective disorder. Up north, you hardly see the sun at all during the winter. And so you don't have sunlight. So when it comes to sunlight in the wintertime, and all the water is frozen. So here's what plants do. The first thing they do is that they drain their leaves of chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. The pigments that absorb green are dried up. So all that's left are the carotenoids. If I go back up here and show you, carotenoids absorb green, blue, indigo, and violet. So what colors do they reflect? Red, orange, and yellow. So up north, this is how you get trees that have some oranges in them, and some reds in them, and some yellows in them. Because all that's left is carotenoids. The tree is basically letting its leaves die because there's too many mouths to feed, if you get my meaning. There's not enough water and not enough sunlight to keep the leaves alive. So the leaves are just slowly dying. So when you're looking up at, oh, the autumn colors look so beautiful, you're looking at dead leaves, you monster. They're going to fall to the ground and they're going to totally decompose. And when you go up north in the winter and you see all the trees have no leaves, they're not dead. They're just dormant. They're waiting for all the snow to melt. They're waiting for the clouds to open up and for the sunlight and the water to come in, and they'll bloom again in the spring. That's why spring is like a renaissance. It's like a rebirth. But that's why we see the reds, the oranges, and the yellows, is because carotenoids is all that's left, because chlorophyll is dried up. All right. We have about 6 minutes left. So here's what we're going to do now. We're actually going to go to the site of the light reactions, and that's going to be the thylakoid membrane. This is where we will pick up tomorrow. Just like we drew the electron transport chain in cell respiration, we're going to draw the electron transport chain that is in the light reaction. So this will be waiting for you when you guys walk in. I want us to draw this until the bell rings. Whatever you don't get drawn, we will pick up tomorrow. And I'm going to tell you the step-by-step process and how part 1 makes ATP and NADPH. Here we go. Because this is a membrane, what is the main component of it? A phospholipid bilayer. Very good. I will label it when I'm all done. I'm just going to fudge the end of this because I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time drawing a bunch of individual circles. You can do the same. I would like to label them, but we have less than a minute left, so I'm just going to hold off. There it is. When you walk in tomorrow, we will label this. This is looking at the thylakoid membrane from a molecular level. If you look at it, you can kind of see it looks like a disc. All right.